Hello, everybody. This is a summary of the key concepts presented in Chapter 8. We're going to start with the outline. You will be receiving this and see what we're talking about. What are the key topics? Moving to the Chapter 8 objectives. And let's get started. So explain the differences between time-constrained and resource-constrained schedule. We need to create effective project scheduling. There are two main types of project scheduling, and they are time-constrained and resource-constrained scheduling. Let's first look at time-constrained scheduling. A definition. The project must be completed by a specific deadline. Characteristics associated with this scheduling. A fixed project end date. We have to complete it by this time. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Resources may be added to meet these deadlines, but our goal is to focus on the specific deadline. And then you see an example of resource constrained scheduling is focusing on the availability of limited resources. So we don't care about the time, but we do care about the resources. We do have a flexible project end date. And you have an example. Key differences between time-constrained scheduling and resource-constrained scheduling. What is the primary focus for both? Time-constrained focuses on deadlines. Resource-constrained focuses on the efficient resource utilization. How much flexibility do we have with the two methods of scheduling? Time-constrained, we have to meet the end date. It cannot be moved. Whereas with resource-constrained, the flexible end date exists. Resource allocation. Time says you can increase resources to meet deadlines. Resource constrained, resources are already constrained, so we have limited availability to extra resources. Project duration, time constrained, is fixed. We have to meet the end date, whereas resource constrained, we have a little flexibility. It's variable in the schedule. We just need more resources. When to use each approach. First, for your time-constrained scheduling. Projects with immovable deadlines. We have to meet the deadline. High priority deliverables. Meet the deadline. And you have an example. On the other hand, we have resource-constrained scheduling. We have our resources very limited. We need more resources. We can't get the job done. We need more time. We need more project resources. Just help. We're drowning here. Recommendations. Determine what's important. Is meeting the deadline important, or is having the right resources at the right time more important? No matter what scheduling approach we use, please engage in regular monitoring. Make sure everybody's on task. We're meeting temporary periods. We have the right resources, and now we can move forward. Sometimes, quite often, you could use both methods of scheduling. And no matter what we do, keep everybody informed. Don't let them get confused. Develop that communication plan. Conclusions. Choose the appropriate scheduling approach based on project priorities and constraints. Types of resource constraints. What is resource constraint? You see its definition for it. Resource constraints are limitations or restrictions on the availability of resources essential to project completion. Why is this important? Please read the statement there. Let's look at some types of resource constraints. We have time constraints, cost constraints, human resource constraints, material constraints, quality constraints. We want to do a good job. We can have more than one of these constraints working against us. We have to know how to schedule in order to minimize the constraints. What are project constraints? A limiting factor that affects the execution of a project, program, portfolio, or process. We have several different types of constraints. Let's listen to him.
In this video, I want to answer the question, what are project constraints? Project constraints are limitations on what you can do. They constrain the choices that you have as a project manager in designing and executing your project. The Project Management Institute defines them formally as a limiting factor that affects the execution of a project, program, portfolio, or process. So, constraints limit your choices. They constrain your options. Let's have some examples. Perhaps the commonest example is time constraints. These are factors that affect your choices in scheduling your project. But you'll also encounter resource constraints. People may not be available at certain times. Material may not be available. Equipment may not be available to hire. If you need a venue or an asset of some kind, then that may be booked and scheduled to somebody else, and therefore you need to work around that. And of course, thinking about resource constraints leads us directly to budgetary constraints. Because when has there been a time when a project manager has been given an unlimited budget? Wouldn't that be nice? Then there are regulatory or legislative constraints. Your project has to comply with the law. And that's not as trite as saying, don't do illegal things, but recognize that many projects work in complex organizational domains with many different legal constraints. Certainly, you'll have constraints over the use of information, the use of data. You'll have health and safety constraints, a whole slew of those. And the internal equivalent of that is policy or governance constraints. You have to comply with the procedures, the policy, and the requirements of your own organization, as well as the external legal and regulatory constraints. And then there's technology. Technology can do a lot, but certainly within the budgetary constraints that you've got, there will be limitations on what the technology available to you can do. And therefore, technology is always likely to be a constraining factor as well as an enabling factor. And finally, there's your stakeholders. Their preferences, their requirements, their needs, and their perceptions are likely, quite rightly, to constrain the decisions and the choices that you make as a project manager in moving your project forward. So project constraints limit your choices. If you're not aware of them consciously, then you're likely accidentally to step outside of those constraints and make a mistake that then needs to be corrected. So early on in your project, during the definition stage, gather an inventory of all the constraints that you can identify and use them as part of the basis for planning your project. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and a thumbs up.
Okay, let's look at recommended actions for each constraint. We have time, cost, human resources, material, and quality constraints. I'll let you look at that list. Remember, after I finish this recording, I will be providing a link to you so you can come back and watch it. You may not be able to play the videos, but I've tried to work around that by sending you a list of the videos that I've used in both Chapter 4 and Chapter 8. So look in your course announcements. You'll see all this information. Now, you see up by time constraints, you have the word time boxing. Is that a new term? Do you know what time boxing is? Well, let's explore it a little bit further. Time boxing. You have the calendar. List all your activities. Then identify the 3 most important tasks for the day. On the other hand, on your daily schedule, assign a specific time to each task. So we have a list of all the things we have to do. We've identified the 3 most important tasks. We moved them over to the daily schedule. We added times that we will complete each, and our goal is to be successful. Our goal is to engage successfully in time boxing. Now, here's a tip for you. Harvard University has always promoted this method. Managing constraints. Tools and techniques for managing constraints. We've talked a little bit about the work breakdown structure, resource leveling, critical path method, and schedule compression. I want to touch on a couple of these. So let's go to critical path method. What is it? Key concepts of critical path. Have the definition for critical path. The longest sequence of dependent tasks that must be completed on time for the project to finish as scheduled. Then we have a definition for critical tasks. And slack or float. It's another term you should become familiar with if you're not already. Slack or float, the amount of time a task can be delayed without impacting subsequent tasks or the overall project timeline. Let's look at the benefits of using the critical path method. It enhances scheduling. You can engage in resource optimization, risk mitigation. You can identify potential bottlenecks and try to do something before they actually surface. And it's a method for you to improve your communication. Keep everybody involved. Let them know what's going on. So how do you determine the critical path? Follow these steps. List all the activities, establish dependencies, which tasks are dependent upon other tasks. Where do they fall in lines of completing the project? What comes before it? What comes after it? Estimate the durations for each activity. Develop a network diagram. Perform forward and backward passes and identify the critical path. Now, if you don't have the software, you would actually have to do all this manually. But wait, I'm going to show you something. I want to show you how critical path analysis can be made simple. So perplexing. What do I do now? We use the critical path analysis.
Critical path analysis made simple. I've been looking on YouTube at how people teach critical path analysis. This is also known as network diagrams. And God, they make it complicated, don't they? Have a look at some of these. These are all people explaining how to find the critical path. Now, you do need to find the critical path because it's the longest route through your diagram, and it's therefore going to be the quickest that you can do your project. You can't do your project quicker than the longest route, so you need to find it. But it doesn't have to be this complicated. In a minute, I'm going to show you a really simple way to do it. But the question is, why do people make it so complicated? And I think it might be because they want to look clever. But I think more likely, they just regurgitate the way that they were taught. And nobody's ever stopped and thought, this is ridiculous. No one's ever thought, no one's actually got time to do this in real life. Can't we find an easier way? And that's what suddenly struck me. It doesn't have to be this complicated. I think there's perhaps a third reason as well, by the way, which is that computers do it like this. So what they're doing in these really horrible, difficult videos is they're showing you how computers calculate the longest route. But human beings are different to computers. We can just see the answer with our eyes. So a much easier way to get the critical path is to do as follows. Write each task on a post-it note and stick them on a big bit of paper or even a whiteboard if you've got it, like this. Put the arrows on connecting the tasks and put the time on each task. How long do you think each task's going to take? And by the way, that's not the hour's work, it's the elapsed time. So if it's a 5-hour job, you think it'll take a week, put a week. I usually like to use weeks. So you've got a diagram drawn out with the arrows and the times. How long is that going to take you? Maybe 20 minutes, maybe quite fun to do that. And once you've got that, you don't have to do all the things that they have on those other videos. You don't have to do the forward pass and the backward pass and the float. All you do, you just look at the diagram and just look at the longest path. So on my diagram, can you see the longest path? See if you can spot it. And yeah, sure enough, there it is. So it's easy. The critical path is obvious to see. In real life, you don't need to add up every branch. You don't need to do all the complicated stuff shown on these other videos. Just do the post-its, stick them on a page, and look at the longest path. And that's what I teach on my training course as well. Because I think you'll find that most project management courses are like these videos on YouTube. They're just a complicated nightmare that no one's actually going to use in real life. So there we are. That's critical path analysis or network diagrams made simple. Please do subscribe to my video channel for more information like this. And if you want to learn all about project management, then do come on one of my courses.
Another thing that you might consider doing is using the critical path calculator. I'll provide the URL to you. Let's look at a real-world example. You're launching a new website. What are your tasks? List them. When you list them, estimate how much time it might take to complete each task. Then engage in finding the critical path. You can use the mathematical formulas, you can use the calculator, or you can just simply put the task on the whiteboard and identify the critical path. And when we sum all these up, we find out that it's going to take 37 days to launch a new website. Let's move to what we call resource optimization. So what is it? It's the process of allocating available resources efficiently to achieve desired goals. What types of resources do we have to consider? It can be time, capital, technology, or manpower. It can be any one or more than one of those resources. Now, sometimes we get bogged down. We can deal with underutilization and overutilization. Let's explore that topic. Underutilization is shown on the left. Overutilization is shown on the right. I'll give you a minute to go down the list and find out what underutilization is. Underutilization means you're not using your resources to full potential. Because of that, you have a reduced return on investment. If you're underutilizing your resources, it could create low employee morale. It could delay outcomes. You might miss some deadlines, or you might not be working smarter. You might just be working harder. And if you're underutilizing, you're increasing your costs. How about overutilization? You're using your resources beyond their capacity over prolonged periods. What can happen if we engage in overutilization? People can get tired. We can be burned out. We can leave. It can decrease your quality. Haste and fatigue make waste. You can increase your risk. If you make a mistake, you're tired, you're worn out, your quality can also decline. And finally, inefficient scaling. Let's look at types of resource optimization. Two main types, resource leveling and resource smoothing. Now, something we could do about this is we could use one of the two, either resource leveling or resource smoothing, or we could use a combination of the two. Let's look at resource leveling. We can adjust the start and finish date when we use resource leveling. If that's not available to us, we may not want to use resource leveling. Here's an example. If you don't use leveling, what can happen? Some team members can become overburdened on specific days. Overburden, burn out, turnover, right? But if we use resource leveling, the tasks are rescheduled to spread the workload evenly over the length of the project. So how does resource leveling work? Tasks are delayed to avoid resource overload. That happens if the task can be delayed. Another way it works, or extend the project duration to maintain resource availability. If you have that option where you can adjust your finish date. How about resource smoothing? There it is. I put it in highlight. Float or slack. We need to know the definition of what that is. Because when we use resource smoothing, we can only deal with the float or slack time. And with resource smoothing, we know we have to meet a specific end date. We cannot adjust it. We cannot ask for more time. So what do? Well, you could hire new people, or you could put in a change request to change the scope. Now, here's a reminder. What is float? The amount of time a task can be delayed without delaying. And you have your example. Task A has a duration of 3 days. Task B depends on task A. So task B cannot start doing the work until task A finishes. If task A finishes on day 3 when they originally scheduled day 5, it has 2 days of float or slack. You can look at those two available dates and make changes. Let's review it. The difference between resource leveling and resource smoothing. With resource leveling, the primary constraint is resource availability. Whereas resource smoothing, the time is essential. We cannot extend the stated end date. With resource leveling, start and end dates can be adjusted. With resource smoothing, they cannot. Critical path may be changed using resource leveling, but resource smoothing, you never see, or typically never see a change in the critical path. With resource leveling, the task can be delayed beyond the float period, right? So they don't have to worry about the float period. But resource smoothing does have to be concerned about the float period because that's the only time that they can use to make changes and try to catch up to where they should be so they can achieve the stated end date. Resource leveling is used when there's an over allocation of resources. When you have resource smoothing, it's when you have an uneven allocation of resources. Resource leveling can be used during the beginning of the resource optimization process, and resource smoothing can actually be used after resource leveling. So we can have a hybrid. We can combine the two methods to achieve our goals. Another way to review it, primary constraint, resources under resource leveling. Resource smoothing, time is our primary constraint. The objective for resource leveling and resource smoothing. We want to avoid over allocation of resources. For resource smoothing, we want to even out resource usage. Schedule flexibility. You can have a little bit more flexibility with the resource leveling. But remember, with resource smoothing, you have to meet that stated end date. And you can only find possible time to work on is in the areas of float or slack. Resource usage, you can delay your task or extend the duration for resource leveling. For resource smoothing, no overloading or extending duration. Use your float or slack. Project duration impact. You can extend the deadline for resource leveling, but you cannot change the end date if you're using resource smoothing. When to use? Use resource leveling when the resources are limited. Use resource smoothing when you want to keep an eye on that due date. No extensions are granted. All right, challenges in resource optimization. Resource scarcity, dynamic project requirements. I see that word changing scopes. We had a really good plan when we started, but now we're being asked to do more. We need to pause. We need to put in a change of request, get the board approved, and resistance to change. Some people don't want to change. They want to work the same way they have always worked. Best practices for resource optimization. There we go. Implement project management tools. Throughout your readings, I'm sure you're going to hear about software, project management software. Right now, we're not using it, but if you have the time, you go try some free examples. They give you a trial. Compare them, see which one you like. Conduct regular resource audits. There's another thing you could do. Cross-train, provide more training, have more employees know how to do different things. Encourage teamwork. What is the resource constraint schedule? One where the sequence and timing of tasks are determined by task dependencies and limits on resource availability. How does project management software create resource constraint? These are the steps. Okay. Any questions? Let's look at an example. Imagine two tasks, both need the same person, and are overscheduled to run at the same time. A resource-constrained schedule will delay one task until the person's free because they can only do one task at a time. Respect all task dependencies. Are there any tasks that are waiting for something else to happen for another task to be completed? And as you're doing this, be realistic. Key benefits. It prevents overallocation, provides realistic timelines, and it helps with capacity planning. And we get everybody involved from day one, so we have support because now they have bought in, they've invested their time and their energy, they want to make this project work. Avoid splitting tasks. What's that mean? When a scheduled task is interrupted and resumed later, rather than being completed in one continuous effort. So we could start something, then we pause, go work on another task, and come back to your original task. But recommendation is to avoid splitting tasks. If we start and stop and start again, how much will that cost? Do the tasks have to be sequential? Are they dependent? What's happening? Identify each task. Some people, they need to stay focused on one item before moving on to another. So quality could be impacted if you split your task. And some tasks are time sensitive. They must be completed by a certain day. Why avoid task splitting? The reason and the impact. Loss of productivity, reduced quality, poor resource utilization, and scheduled inefficiencies. Right. So now we've been warned about the hazards of splitting tasks. Is there any time when splitting tasks is acceptable? Here's 3 examples. Long durations and low setup costs, priority changes, and actions taken to minimize the disruption or risk caused by those. And finally, use software. Some best practices. Avoid splitting unless absolutely necessary. Use buffer time or float to manage resource conflicts. Use project management software. So if you go in the field and become a project manager, it would probably be better if you had the software to work with. I remember one time when I was taking the statistics class, I didn't have a calculator. In fact, I had to program the computer to understand and do statistical analysis. So first I had to learn how to program the computer. Then I had to enter the data, and then I got my result. I used to have sheet after sheet after sheet for one statistical problem. And now, if I want to do statistical analysis, I open Excel and I get my work done in a very small location and very fast. So think about project management software. General guidelines for task assignment. Who gets what? Match their skills, consider their availability, use past performance and experience. Maybe we tried you on one task, but you didn't perform. We don't want to get rid of you because we think we have another project for you. What do people prefer to do? If they're not happy working, they're not going to work, or they'll work very slow. Their heart won't be into it. Be careful, because you have this rising star. Don't overload that person. Don't give them more than what others receive. Collaborate with team members. Who gets along with who? You can have both teams, both types of teams. One team could be the team that does work, that work together. But in other cases, you can have a team where some people don't want to do anything, and that means you have to do everything. And also help them rise in your organization. What type of careers do they want to do? They need the experience to continue to develop professionally. Give them the opportunity. Take them as a new employee, give them a simple task, and increase the intensity of the task. There's another thing called multi-project resource scheduling. This is when you've got so many hats in the fire, wearing so many hats, there's just not enough time to do it. Here's your definition of multi-project resource scheduling. What are the key goals of having to juggle multiple projects? I'm sure everybody has had to engage in this process. How do you manage all your projects? You have your personal life, you have your professional life, you have your academic life. There's so many things going on in your life. How do you multitask? Or do you? We want to be able to find a way to balance our workload, avoid resource allocation, maximize organizational efficiency. So we want to be able to balance our workloads. We want to avoid resource over allocation. We don't want to stretch ourselves so thin that we can't do any job right. And what we do in the business or in the organization will have an impact on others in your business organization as well as the whole company or the whole organization. Common problems. Here's a list. You can see the problem statement and you can see the impact. The resource conflicts, priority confusion, what's important, cognitive overload. I'm so tired, I'm working so hard, I can't think. Project delays, you can have bottleneck. There's no central oversight, nobody's watching, and you can have inaccurate forecasting. When should you use MPRS? When we use resources across many projects, The organization is used to doing it. We don't want to continue to experience constant delays or conflicts because we don't have enough resources. You want to develop further in your career. You want to learn new methods of doing things. And you want to prioritize. So, how do you manage multiple projects? What do you do? This person's going to give us some ideas.
Project management training teaches you how to manage projects. But one of the commonest questions is not how to manage a project, but how do I manage multiple projects, more than one project at a time? And that's the question I'm going to answer in this video. Actually, there's no simple answer to how to manage multiple projects. There's no methodology for it. The methodology is project management methodology. The challenge is to apply it in parallel across a number of projects at one time. And for that, I have a range of strategies to offer you. The first strategy, and the most important single idea in this whole video, recognizes the fact that human beings are just rubbish at multitasking. Whatever anyone tells you, we can't do it. Multitasking works if all of the things you're trying to do require very low amounts of cognitive load, mental processing. And if one of those things you need to do requires a high cognitive load, you can still do that and carry on with other simple tasks. You can drive and have a conversation with your passenger and probably change the CD at the same time safely, because although all of those things require some mental effort, most of them you can do without concentrating, and therefore you can keep your attention on the road. And note also that if you're a beginner driver, you can't do that because everything seems to take a high cognitive load, even the conversation. And therefore, when you're focused on driving and it's very difficult because it's new, you can't do anything else. So what matters if you're trying to manage multiple projects is that you don't try to multitask. What you need to do is what I call serial monotasking. You do a thing, you put it down, and you do something else. And therefore, my key idea is that of having multiple hats. Recognize that for each project, metaphorically speaking, you have a different hat to wear, and you can only wear one hat at a time. So the secret to managing multiple projects is to wear multiple hats, one at a time. And therefore, when you finish the task on one project, take that hat off, put it down, and pick up a new hat to wear. The second key idea is to understand the time cycle of each of the projects you're trying to manage. For some projects, you'll find that things hardly change from one week to the next, whereas other projects, well, something seems to happen almost every day. And there are other projects where, if you turn your back for 10 minutes, everything's changed. Recognizing that time cycle means you know how frequently you need to check in with each project. It wouldn't be right to default to the simple, every project gets the same amount of time, and I check in with each project on a regular cycle, and it's the same cycle for each project, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, because all projects are not equal, and in particular, they have different time cycles. You can check in on that slow time cycle project maybe once or twice a week. The faster time cycle project may need you to check in every day, and other projects may need you to be constantly alert to what's going on, your default attention. The third idea I'd like to give you is the idea of the commander's intent. This comes from the military, the idea And I think probably most famously in early modern history, from Nelson's instruction to the captains of the ships in his fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar. The idea of commander's intent is you tell your team the most important fundamentals of what you're trying to achieve, the commander's intent, and you leave it to their judgment, their intelligence, their common sense to act appropriately based on understanding what you're trying to achieve. You don't try to micromanage. That way, you can turn your attention away from Project A to Project B, knowing that the team that are dealing with Project A know what you want of them and can make sensible decisions in your absence. Without that kind of delegation, managing multiple projects is just going to be impossible. My fourth idea is right at the outset, build a strategic plan for everything you're handling, all the projects you're involved with. Put them onto one chart, represent projects or major work streams as bars on that chart and see how they interact, and then shift the timing of activities, work streams, and in particular of deliverables and milestones on individual projects so that you don't get crowding. You get a reasonable spacing between the major milestone on Project A and the next major milestone on Project B. If you find that Project C has a milestone at around the same time, then shift one of them so that you are able to plan how you give each project your attention, and you're not trying to concentrate on two projects at critical points at the same time. Strategy 5 is to focus on the highest value activities that you can deliver and to delegate as much of the rest as you possibly can. So the question arises, what are those really high value activities, the ones that you can do and you shouldn't be or can't delegate? For me, there are 4 of them. Firstly, facilitating high-level problem solving. The key problems that will define success or failure of your project, you need to be in there facilitating the problem-solving approach and making sure that it gets done properly. And linked to that is decision-making. There will be decisions that you don't want to or cannot delegate. Those are high-value, governance-related activities that you need to keep for yourself. Number 3 is engaging with principal stakeholders, the kind of stakeholders who are so important to your project and who recognize that importance that they expect you as the project manager to be engaging with them and taking their thoughts, their comments, their concerns seriously. And the 4th thing that you can't delegate is mentoring, coaching, supporting, guiding your team members. Yes, your workstream leads and team leaders can be doing that for their team members, but you have a responsible to the people who work directly for you to look after their interests and to help them to develop their careers and to thrive on your project. And they can't do that for themselves, so you have to do it for them. That's my number 4, principal high-value activity. The 6th strategy is to focus on exceptions. You know the plan, your team knows the plan, and your team should be working that plan. So your attention should go to the exceptions. You should be available for your team to come to you when things aren't going according to plan, when they run into problems, when they don't know what to do. Number 7 is to prioritize leadership over management. This is about creating an environment where your team and the individual members of your team can thrive and succeed and deliver the project for you. In another video, I talked about the importance of servant leadership and its value to project management, and this is fundamentally what this thing is all about. It's about serving your teams so that they can get on and deliver the multiple projects that you are trying to control. My 8th strategy is to block out your week. At the end of each week, review what's coming up in the next week, the key milestones, important meetings you've got to attend, and block out chunks of each day for each of your projects. Give each project the right amount of time based on not only its priority as a project, but the priority generated by what's going to be happening in that week. And always leave time in your diary for surprises. Block out spaces to deal with problems that you don't know this Friday afternoon will occur next week. When you get into work on Monday morning, review anything that's happened over the weekend, talk to your people, and then either confirm that blocking or shift it around to accommodate the new priorities of your week. One of the things I always like to say is a schedule that has no float, has too much risk, and too much stress. Number 9, if you're going to manage multiple projects, you must be organised. I have 4 particular suggestions for you here, and the first is to make a sensible investment in a system or processes or project management software that will make your life easier and make your projects much more controllable. And by sensible investment, I mean don't go for the best, the whizziest, the most fancy software. Go for the kind of tools that people will use and that do all you need them to do and very little else. My second suggestion is you keep a file of project summaries, whether you keep it on your mobile device, on your laptop computer, or in a physical notebook or a set of folders. Always have with you key data about each of your projects. That means if you need to swap suddenly from project A to project E, and you haven't been working on project E for a while, you can always gather the key information, the names, the phone numbers, the deadlines. All of that is ready to hand so that you can be effective as quickly as possible. Next, I like to keep a multi-part notebook. Yes, I like physical notebooks. If you've got multiple projects, then carry a notebook where it's easy to go to the right page for the project you're working on. And if you're not going to buy a multi-part notebook, then it's quite easy to mark the edges of your existing ordinary notebook with color coding so that you can quickly turn to the right section of your notebook. And finally, make good use of visualization tools that allow you and your team members to quickly key into what's going on. Tools like a Kanban chart, like a linear responsibility chart, like a strategy chart. All of these enable you to mentally accommodate huge amounts of information very quickly indeed. Number 10 may be boring to some people, but be absolutely scrupulous about keeping up to date with your administration and your project control. Of course, if you've got the resources to secure a project administrator or a project controller or a program administrator who can handle that on your behalf, that's wonderful. But if you can't, stay on top of your admin or it will jump on top of you at the worst possible moment. It's a rule of the universe that when one of your projects goes into meltdown, that'll be the time when HR are screaming for you to fill out some forms and to do some assessments. So keep on top of those forms, keep on top of those assessments, get them done in good time so that you can focus on your project at those critical points. Number 11, managing multiple projects can be overwhelming. It can get to you. You need to be able to handle overwhelm effectively, to overcome it. And for that, we have a separate video, so I won't go into that here. And finally, number 12, get comfortable with saying no. You've got a lot on your plate. You've got multiple projects to handle, and some of them may be moving to a critical stage. You need to be able to say no. Make no into a positive by seeing no as a noble objection. Noble objection is when you decline to do something for the right reasons and you decline to do it in a way that is polite, courteous and respectful. And what are those right reasons? Because you have strategic priorities and saying yes would inhibit your ability to deliver more important, more beneficial, higher value strategic priorities. Get good at saying no. Managing multiple projects will always be hard work. You will never be in your comfort zone. But at some point, when you've shown that you're good at managing one project, and there isn't a big enough project to occupy you full time, your organization will say, here you are. Here are 2 projects, 3 projects, 4 projects to manage, and you will need to manage them, and these 12 strategies will help you. Please give us a thumbs up if you like this video. We've got loads more great videos to come, so please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of them. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.
All right. Next issue we have to address is time-phased budget. Perhaps you're not comfortable working with a budget. Take it slow. We're going to highlight this type of budget during Chapter 8. But keep in mind, when you get to Module 5, you will be creating a budget. So put your thinking caps on. Start thinking about it. And the good news is, using time-phased budget is really not that difficult. But there's a few related tasks that you will complete. So here we go. We break down your project scope. We estimate costs for each. We spread the cost across the timeline. Continue to monitor and adjust it. And as always, you're encouraged to use software tools. And like we heard in that last video, they don't have to have all the bells and whistles in it. It just has to work. So what is time-phased budget? A time-phased budget is a financial plan that allocates project costs over specific time periods, such as weeks or months or days. This approach allows for better tracking and control of expenditures throughout the project's life cycle. So key features: you break the totals down, determine your cost, monitor it. Baselines. Okay, so what's the difference between time-phased budget and time-phased budget baselines? Time-phased budget is something you came up with and have a plan, put it together, but it wasn't approved. It did not become the standard. But when we move into baselines, now we have a standard. Comparing time-based budget and time-phased budget baseline. The purpose of each. Planning tool for budget, standard for baseline. Status: it's a draft or a working document for your eyes only. But when it becomes a baseline, it's been finalized and authorized. How do you use time-phased budget? Use guides. Open the baseline surface. Since it's standard, performance evaluations can come into play. Flexibility: with time-phased budget, it can be adjusted. But the time-phased budget baseline, since it's been standardized, authorized, before you make a change, you must receive approval. Benefits of time-phased baseline: improve cost control, supports performance tracking, enables variance analysis, and it informs resource planning. How to create it? Using these steps. That's about all I'm going to say about the time-phased budget and time-phased budget baseline at this time. I'll provide more information for you later. But while you're working, if you ever have any questions, please remember that phone number. You have a hotline to me. That's my telephone number. It's landline. Do not send me text messages. I won't receive them. You have to pick up the phone, call. I hope this helps you. I wish you success in completing Module 2 assignments. Thank you very much.